Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. On the behalf of the Islamabad Policy Institute, I formally welcome you all in today's webinar discussion. The title of today's webinar is Rising Islamophobia in Europe. The event is taking place in the context of an incessant hike in Islamophobic sentiments across Europe. With this brief introduction, I would request Executive Director of Islamabad Policy Institute, Professor Sayyid Sajjad Bukhari, to deliver his welcome. Professor Sayyid Sajjad Bukhari is the founder of Islamabad Policy Institute. He is currently heading IPI as its Executive Director. Over to you, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Masood Shajran, Chairman Islamic Human Rights Commission, Mubin Jafar Mir, Research Scholar, Islamabad Policy Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I'm pleased to welcome you all to a webinar on Rising Islamophobia in Europe. We have come together to hear thoughts of our scholar Mubin Jafar Mir and Chairman Islamic Human Rights Commission, Mr. Shajah, on this very important topic. Ladies and gentlemen, the webinar is being held in the wake of recent Islamophobic incidents directed against the Muslims in Europe. We demand an urgent appraisal of the world's response toward this grim issue. The problem is more often, unfortunately, not only overlooked, but also misinterpreted to divert the attention from its severity. Several recent reports compiled by eminent think tanks corroborate the claims of Muslims being victimized on the basis of their religious belief. There is a well-organized campaign being carried out by anti-Islam think tanks, political parties, conservative writers and groups, and right-wing groups to tarnish the image of Islam and portray Muslim as agent of chaos. Resultantly, Europe has witnessed an abrupt rise in the right-wing political activity that seek to generate anti-Muslim rhetoric for their political leverage. The war on terror, the rise of ISIS, the continuous destabilization in many Muslim states are some of the factors that help perpetuate a negative perception of Islam in the Western world. The anti-Muslim atmosphere in Europe has, ironically, strangulated the voice of dissent within the European societies and has damaged the European culture of mutual coexistence. The Islamophobic rhetoric and its translation into the national policies pose a direct threat to the lives of the millions of Muslims living in Europe and beyond. Muslims in Europe are at a great disadvantage and are particularly vulnerable to discrimination and suspicion because of their religious credentials, worsening economic worsening economic indicators because of COVID-19, and ever increasing isolation of the world. It is feared may aggravate the circumstances for Muslims in Europe. There is a clear and present danger that right-wing political parties can whip up anti-Muslim sentiments to divert attention from the poor governance and economic losses due to mishandling of COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, we would this afternoon be hearing the insights of our speakers and take valuable contributions from the audience on the issue which has the far-reaching political and humanitarian impact. Time is right for Pakistan, which has always raised its voice and has worked towards pursuing interests of Muslim countries, Muslim world, to play a leading role. It is incumbent on leaders, representatives, academics, and religious scholars from the Muslim world to come forward and play a constructive role in stemming the tide of Islamophobia across the world in general and Europe in particular. Without taking any further time, I would like to conclude my remarks and move to our speakers for their insight on the topic. I look forward for a meaningful dialogue. I thank you once again for spending time to join us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your remark. Now I would like to introduce to our honorable speakers. We are joined by Mr. Masood Shajra. He is the Chairman of Islamic Human Rights Commission. He has joined us from London, from the UK, for which we are hugely grateful. And we have also been joined by our own senior researcher of IPI, Mr. Mubin Jafar, who has lately written an article on Islamophobia in Europe. Over to you, Mr. Masood Shajra. I would like to hear from him, his opinion. Thank you very much, sir.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. First of all, I would like to thank yourselves for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to discuss this very important issue, something that is affecting us globally, and unfortunately is not just within the Muslim world, and it's something that we need to understand the sources for this, and the way that Islamophobia and the hatred against Muslims is being promoted, directed, and the impact of it on our community, and why is it, and so forth. First of all, I have to say that although I'm one of those number of people which were involved in promoting the name of Islamophobia for this phenomena, I have to say that I don't really fully agree with the term that is being used, because phobia is a fear of something, either logical or natural. For example, people are fearful of dark or heights and different things. But Islamophobia is neither natural or indeed something that happens without interference and creation. it's like racism, it's like anti-Semitism. It's something that is got a purpose, it's got a roots of promoters, and it's there to divide communities and create havoc. So I think the terminology of anti-Muslim hatred is much more appropriate, although it probably is too late and everybody is referring to it to Islamophobia. What I think is important for us to define what we mean. And but the second thing is the fact that there was a time that when we were sort of talking about this phenomena, there was, people were saying that they didn't accept it. They didn't accept that Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred exists, or we launched our first report in the House of Lords in 2001. Jack Straw, which was the Home Secretary at the time, said he's not convinced that Islamophobia exists. Now, even the Islamophobes agree and acknowledge that it exists, but the difference between those who are promoting Islamophobia and those of us who are trying to sort of address it is that the Islamophobes agree that Islamophobia exists, but they legitimize it and they say that this is because Muslims are extremists, etc. They sort of bring Daesh in and ISIS in and so forth, and they say that it exists, but it's because of that. I.e., they blame the victims of Islamophobia. And so really now, I have to say that it's very difficult to find anyone who actually sort of says that Islamophobia doesn't exist. That's another factor that we need to understand. But then, the point is this, that how we understand Islamophobia, where it comes from, and what is motivated, what is the reason for it. And Islamophobia is that the West have used, is a form of racism. And racism not from a point of view that it's attached a particular race, but racism from point of view that it's part of modernization, creating others and saying one particular group of people are not the same as everybody else. They are exceptional and they should be treated exceptional. They are not really, should be given the same acknowledgement and recognition of being norm as part of the rest of us. And this is what the same phenomena that was used for racism is used for Islamophobia, and we see we could chase it back to Spain after the Andalusia, and when they decided that that Muslims were not part of the human race, and Muslims and Jews were treated and ethnically cleansed, and genocide was used against them. And then same policy was taken to Americas and implemented against the indigenous population. And then there was the arguments that that these people, are they human or are they not human? And they were arguing that they have soul or they don't have soul. And these was the arguments that was going on in Europe. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. And if anybody is interested, there are a lot of material available on our website from Professor Rahman and others that actually going deep into that understanding. But it's important that for us to recognize that what we are seeing now is this this concept that Muslims, although they are part of Europe and part of global society, they are not really equal to every other citizens, and they need to be treated in a different way. And they are not equal citizens. They, be it in Myanmar, be it in Paris or France or Britain or Germany, or Trump's United States and so forth and so on. These are others. There is something weird and different with them, and we need to have different set of standards to treat them and to have a relationship with them. And they're backward, they're this, they're that, they're violent, they're this, and when you look at all these excuses that are being used, and you see that who is really dying as a result of violence around the world, even with Daesh, overwhelming majority of those people who are being killed by Daesh and ISIS are actually Muslims. Daesh is not a phenomenon against, Islam against non-Muslims. As a matter of fact, it sort of kills mostly Muslims, be it in Iraq, Syria, or, Afghanistan or elsewhere. So really, this idea of us and them with concept of modernization is at the heart of a tool which is being used. And, we saw it sort of only very recently, Macron using this, and actually saying there is something exceptionally wrong in Islam, and therefore we need to have a different sets of rules, and we need to, reform Islam. For what? I mean, where is a secular society, which France claimed to be, and most Europe claimed to be? Why is it that the secular society sees it fit to decide what is a good form of a religious religion and what's the bad form of a religion? What is up to them to decide? Be it on Islam or Christianity or Judaism or anything else. It's not their business to do that. I actually remember when Asma Jahangir was a special rapporteur for religious freedom. She came, and that was the time of Tony Blair. She came to Britain to do a report regarding Britain. And we had a lot of discussions, and we convinced her on this point, and she put it in her report. That is not the job of a secular society to decide what should be a religion. It's actually for the religious group themselves to define that. And that is a fact. And governments set up sets of rules, and it's not for one particular group, it's for everybody, and everybody has to adhere to those rules. If they don't like it, they campaign to change it. That is how the government's supposed to operate. And it comes, sorry, I'm going to be jumping a bit on here, because otherwise we won't have enough time to deal with all the aspects that I want to touch on, and integrate them and empower them. And I think that aspect, and I remember that time very clearly, that there were articles after articles in Guardian, in Times, and think tanks and so forth and so on, which were arguing that now NATO needs to organize itself against Islam. At that time, NATO, a nuclear power, should organize itself against Islam. At that time, we had neither 9/11 or anything like that. We didn't have any sort of these what they refer to jihadi groups operating. If there was any jihadi group, was jihadi groups which were supporting the effort of West in Afghanistan and so forth against the Russians. So really, part of this, what I'm trying to argue, is is actually the need of the Western ideology to have an enemy. Without an enemy, it actually cannot survive. It needs to have an enemy to mobilize itself. It needs to have an otherness to organize itself. And this need of having an otherness to organize itself, to mobilize yourself, to sort of get people on a single platform and unite them. It's something that was used by crusaders. You know, the crusaders, when they start organizing themselves to go to Palestine. It was 100 years after already Muslims were in power. It wasn't something that Muslims came and took over Palestine, and then sort of a few years later, the Crusaders, the Christians decided, look, we got to go and get this back. 100 years was gone since the what we call it liberation, and they call it conquer. And it was done nothing to do with that scenario 100 years before. It happened because Christianism and Christendom in Europe needed something to mobilize itself, to revive itself, and to sort of unite Europe on a single platform. And crusade was done on those bases, and they went around and said that, this demon Salahuddin, they start collecting taxes, they start mobilizing, and we saw the revival of the Christianism. Then we saw the same policy was implemented in Nazi Germany. Germans were united on demonization of minorities, be it the Jewish community or others. They create this otherness to define themselves as a unit and a unifying factor. This same thing, same policy was used at Bosnia-Herzegovina at the time of former Yugoslavia. And the Serbs actually used the same thing to unite, to create a bond, and using the Muslims as the enemy, collected enemy, someone that they could unite against. And they demonized them to the extent that neighbors start killing neighbor, neighbors start raping neighbor. There were children being killed, and the atrocities of ethnic cleansing was horrifying. How could a human being do that? A human being could do that once you demonize a group of people to that level, and they become the focus of othernization to unite yourselves. Same thing is happening in Myanmar. And unfortunately, we are hearing the same things happening, same noises happening in India now and elsewhere. And this is extremely dangerous. They all come from the same source. The other aspect is social engineering. Europe is worried and concerned about the growing number of Muslims in their midst. And both from the fact that we actually have many children as Muslims, far more than the rest of the population, but also the conversion. There is, Islam is the fastest growing religion, not just in West, but around the world. And there is a fear of that. And they actually feel that this group of people with their own ideology, their own politics, their own economics, it actually creates a danger. And then that's why you get sort of think tanks, which the brother was referring to, like Rand Corporation and others, coming up with ideas that how to manipulate and what to do with Islam. And, their reports divided Islam to 4 groups: the secular Muslims, the Sufi Muslims, and then those are traditional and those who are political. And they said that most of the resources are in hand of the traditionalists and the political Islam, and the other two don't have, the secular Muslims and so don't have much. What we need to do, we need to actually resource the other two to strengthen them against the and this is what they've done. I mean, this is why you see secular Muslims are being put in charge in the governments. They basically are using them as tools of fighting the traditional Muslim community. The commission in Britain, Commission for against extremism, is run by self-confessed secularists who really have got a hatred of Islam, or indeed they invite for consultation groups like ex-British Muslim to decide what should happen and to represent Muslim. I mean, it's just like inviting an ex-communist to decide what communism should be, or it really is bizarre the way that is going. It's part of it. It's part of the social engineering, and Islamophobia is being used as a stick for reforming and forcing Muslims to behave in and change their principles of their religion. If you are going to be traditionalist or believe in political Islam and so forth, this stick is used against you. If you abandon those and join the secularists, doesn't matter you pray or not, they don't care about that. Then you become a good Muslim. And then, the carrot is brought in. And this is why we see people like our mayor, Sadiq Khan, as long as he's sort of the forefront of the sort of gay movement, and he goes in gay parade, his first one who stands with his wife, and he promotes that. He promotes the first people he visited after he became mayor on the first election was he met with the Israeli ambassador and the Zionist leaders the first night. And he actually gave them signals before the election. And he said that if he wins, he's going to organize the biggest Happy Birthday Israel for 70th birthday in London. So, if you do that, then you become a good Muslim. If you are standing to the principles of Islam and standing for justice for all, and supporting of the oppressed, and wanting an economic system which is not abusive, it shares and it cares, then you're a bad Muslim, and Islamophobia is used as a stick. So the stick and the carrot, you become like that, you become the mayor, you become extremists, and there is a propaganda and plan to stop you being invited by the press or by the BBC and so forth. You are basically become sort of enemy of humanity and demonized and so forth. This is a part of social engineering, and now we are seeing prevent being used against children and so forth, and being sort of sent all around the world. I don't think we got enough time for me to go into prevent and things, but what I'm trying to do in this short talk is actually explain the origin of Islamophobia and why is it and how it's being used. And it's being used to social engineering a new form of European Islam or American Islam or Islam, which serves the interests of colonial system. And the colonial powers have used that in our countries, be it in Africa, in India and everywhere else, divide and rule, and forced to create an element of, because they realize that they cannot fight something like Islam from outside. So they create something inside, and they start that demonization process, that there is a bad Islam and there is a good Islam. The good Islam is Islam that actually accepts secularism and serves the purpose of colonial powers. And bad Islam is the one that stands up and gives empowerment to people and supports the oppressed around the world and creates, tries to create a justice society for all. I leave it here, inshallah. I do apologize if I wasn't able to articulate in a short time what I should have done. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much, sir. He has aptly apprised us about the Islamophobia, that how it's being used in Europe and how it came into being. Now I would like to move to our other honorable speaker, our senior researcher, Mubin Jafavi, who has lately written an article, a research article, actually on Islamophobia, in which he has explained that what is actually happening in Europe and how Islamophobia is actually on the rise. Now I would like to actually move to the microphone and I would like to hear from him. Okay. Over to you, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Islamabad Policy Institute, for providing me this opportunity to share my views on the subject of today's webinar. Thank you, Executive Director IPI Professor Sajjad Bukhari, Chairman Islamic Human Rights Commission Masood Tajre, and the audience who have taken time out of their busy schedules and have joined us here. Without taking any time, I would like to share my findings on rising trends of Islamophobia today. There is a dire need to understand the fact that attacks on Muslims in Europe are on the rise and Islamophobia really exists. It is a reality that is often ignored and not acknowledged at the government levels. Whenever a Muslim is attacked, Western governments and media use deceptive terms like racist killing, an incident of far-right extremists, the killer was drug addicted, he was mentally retarded, and all these terms are used to divert attention from the deep-seated Islamophobia in Europe. There is a Western saying, a problem is not a problem, the problem is your attitude about the problem. The indifferent attitude of European governments towards the issue of Islamophobia has further aggravated lives of the Muslims in Europe. What happened in Germany in February 2020 is a grim reminder of the neglect of European governments to accept the phenomenon of Islamophobia, despite the attacker publishing a manifesto containing conspiracy theories against Muslims. These fears were confirmed by an Ankara-based think tank CETA. In one of its reports, it explains how in 2018 alone in France, 52% increase in Islamophobic attacks were witnessed. Then I have mentioned in my paper some similar episodes occurring in other European states as well. Moving further, in one of its reports, Pew Research Center highlights how 44% German, 62% Finns, and 53% Italians consider Islamic values in a sharp contrast to European ideals and believe that both cannot coexist. We will afterwards talk about how such Islamophobic perceptions take shape in an organized way in modern Europe. It is meanwhile necessary to understand it doesn't augur well for the Muslims living in Europe. An important piece of research conducted by Open Society Foundation in May 2019 also forewarned that how anti-Muslim rhetoric would not remain confined within European streets, but it had propensity for absorption into national political discourses. Next slide, please. Here I am going to talk about how Islamophobia takes shape in modern Europe in an organized way. So number one, there are right-wing political parties. Islamophobic narrative is generated by right-wing political parties. Some right-wing political parties like Valams belong in Belgium, the Alternative for Germany, and the Sweden Democrats have considerably enhanced their political fortunes by using anti-Muslim discourse. Then there are some works of conservative think tanks. like policy exchange at the Center for Social Cohesion, which is now merged with Henry Jackson Society. Works of those think tanks normalize the generation of anti-Muslim discourse in Europe. Then these discourses are used by popular leaders, like we have seen German Chancellor Angela Merkel using the term Islamic extremism, and French President Emmanuel Macron using the words like Islamic separatism. These words credence to the fact that anti-Muslim sentiments are now being mainstreamed by elected European leaders. They are no more limited to European streets politics. They have now gone way forward to national discourses. Similarly, then there are Islamophobic groups wreaking havoc on European streets, like Stop Islamization of Denmark is a group, and then there is another group, English Defence League, and they receive full support from their respective governments. Their anti-Islamic rhetoric is later translated into national foreign policy discourses of those states. Then there is academic Islamophobia as well, and it's also a bitter reality that fuels the fires of Islamophobia in Europe. How conservative writers play their disturbing role is explained by Liz Fickety, the executive director of the Institute of Race Relations, a European-led initiative that works towards struggle for racial justice in Britain and Europe and other parts of the world. He writes, street fighting forces at one hand and cultural conservatives and neoconservative writers at the other hand. It means it is not only about street fighting forces, but also about cultural conservatives and neoconservative writers who are fueling the fire of Islamophobia in Europe. Then some writers, they present controversial theories like Eurabia theory. I would like to talk about it. It was popularized by a British author, Bat Yover. Because this theory spreads a message that one day Europe is going to be dominated by Arab Muslims. And this theory was used by Anders Breivik, who killed 77 people in 2011 in Oslo. And later he said his incident was directed at stopping Islamization of Norway. Next slide, please. Then there are some reasons for the rise in Islamophobia. We all know that Muslims flooded the Europe after the World War II and played a positive role in its construction. When European economy slowed down in the 1970s and the oil crisis of 1970s shook Europe, European states started implementing tougher immigration policies. Then, coming straight to 9/11, it started a debate of us versus them, where Western media remained on the forefront of depicting Muslims as enemies of Western societies. Likewise, the financial crisis of 2007 came. It saw an emergence of populist political parties which started blaming Muslim immigrants for their negative role in slowing down European economies, and they started employing Islamophobic rhetoric for their political goals. Like Robert Lincoln in his article, Europe's Angry Muslims for Foreign Affairs writes, it is one of the another reasons, by the way. So unlike American Muslims who are geographically diffuse, ethnically fragmented, and generally well off, Europe's Muslims gather in bleak enclaves with their compatriots like Algerians in France, Moroccans in Spain, Turks in Germany, and Pakistanis in the United Kingdom. So it means that there are less interracial marriages in Europe as compared to the United States of America. So it's also one of the reasons, because their lands, Arab lands, they are very near to Europe and they take 2-3 hours by air and they reach there. So they have that special attachment with their native lands. So it is also one of the reasons that both culture found themselves at odds with each other. Then the Social Research Institute, in its poll of 2014, claimed that the share of the Muslim population in France is 31%, but the actual share was only 6%. This is a well-planned propaganda spearheaded by notable institutes to spread panic among Europeans about the Muslims, and it also helps them in whipping up anti-Muslim sentiments in Europe. Next slide. Here, I would like to present some recommendations for improving the situation of the Muslims in Europe. The first one, as we have witnessed, immigration policies of different states have been discriminate against the Muslims. If inclusiveness in immigration policies is ensured, it will play a positive role in addressing rising Islamophobia in Europe. And similarly, reviewing counter-terrorism policies which single out Muslims can also be helpful in countering Islamophobia. Then, Muslims should be taken on board while taking decisions. It is also an important step towards this direction. For instance, in Spain, the Spanish Islamic Commission (CIE) officially represents Spanish Muslims and deals with the national government of Spain for the matters affecting Muslims living there. Such models should be replicated in other European states as well. Then Muslims should be integrated into European life. The process was started quite late and has now been slowed down. For instance, the first legislation for inclusion of Muslims into European life started decades late when so-called temporary guests of Germany were allowed through a law of immigration in just 1999 to apply for citizenship for the very first time. Then in 2005, an immigration law allowed a provision of funding for mandatory integration courses to them. If the process had commenced decades earlier, the state for Muslims would have been different and they would have been properly integrated into European societies. Then Germany established National Conference, the German Conference on Islam (DLK). The platform was introduced in 2006 to encourage goal-oriented dialogue between Muslims and German authorities. Due to the initiative, Islamic religious curriculum in schools and professorships in Islamic theology at various German universities were made possible. Such intra-faith dialogues are a key to melt animosities and encourage mutual coexistence in an otherwise hostile European societies. The Netherlands, in past, set up a Muslim-oriented broadcasting organization in 1986. The organization had then helped in conveying concerns of the Muslims. So we have seen the negative role media always plays in depicting, like Edward said in his book, Covering Islam, has explained that how media and such have used to stigmatize Muslims in European societies. So the more Muslims participate in the media, the better it will be in countering Islamophobia in Europe. Then funding comes funding. Spain launched a strategic plan for citizenship and integration and allocated more than 2 billion euros for programs in social services, employment, women empowerment, health, education, and youth. It helped in addressing the grievances of Spanish Muslims by integrating them into the mainstream Spanish public life. Such projects should be revised in other European states as well. They will play a better role in countering recent waves of Islamophobia in Europe. Then there is another reason. European Union needs to make sure that its values of human rights are not sacrificed while pursuing its commercial interest abroad. Like we have seen, European Union refused to accept Hamas victory in 2006. Then it didn't support democratically elected government of Mohammed Morsi in Egypt and remained a supporter of Israel in the latest quest to grab Palestinian land. This has tarnished the image of European Union among the Muslims and widened the mistrust among both. So European Union needs to understand such dimensions of human rights as well. Then use of arts can go a long way in depicting the positive image of Islam in the Western world as well. I have mentioned in my paper different initiatives like in 2017 British movie Felicia and the Tufix comic strips by German artist Sofina helped greatly in highlighting the contributions of Muslims. In addition to undermining European human values, Islamophobia would particularly adversely impact the working woman as noted by European Network Against Racism. Empowering women in Muslim societies will negate the perception that Muslim societies are largely patriarchal. It will also establish a goodwill among others who view Islam as oppressive towards Muslim women. Next slide, please. Here I would like to conclude my presentation with some recommendations for Pakistani policymakers, researchers, and academics to play a constructive role in countering the rising phenomenon of Islamophobia. The first step Pakistan can take is beefing up its diplomatic efforts at the United Nations to draw the global body's attention towards long-pending issues of Palestine and Kashmir and play a leading role in their solution under the light of related United Nations Security Council resolutions. The eroding legitimacy of the UN has created a sense of deprivation among Muslims. It will go a long way in restoring confidence in the UN and lessening the intensity of Islamophobia. Then Pakistani scholars and diplomats can make outreach to European parliaments and human rights organizations to highlight the discriminatory behavior directed towards the Muslims in Europe. Then Pakistani diaspora, which largely comprises Muslims population, can play a determining role in encouraging interfaith dialogues in European societies. Pakistani diaspora can be highly beneficial in addressing the concerns of Muslims in Europe. Moving further, setting in motion people to people, parliament to parliament, and think tanks to think tank dialogues and academic exchange programs too would create a huge difference in raising awareness among the severity of the issue. The agenda of Islamophobia should be on the forefront when the government of Pakistan diplomatically engages in bilateral dialogue with the European Union. With these recommendations, I would like to conclude my presentation with the saying of Pakistan's founding father, Quaid Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who says, Islam expects every Muslim to do his duty. And if we realize our responsibility, time will come soon when we shall justify ourselves worthy of a glorious past. This is all from my side. I look forward to a constructive question and answer session. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your great explanation of Islamophobia. You have given us a great insight that what is happening in the Europe regarding Islamophobia, and you have also given us well thought way forward. Now I would like to ask participants if they have got any questions. I have got actually 3 questions here with me already, which have been sent by some of the participants. However, if they have got any live questions, I would like to hear from them. Is there any? I've got a question from Muhammad Sharif from Lahore. He's a student at GCU, Government College, University, Lahore. He opines that when Muslims move to the West, they find it hard to assimilate in the communities there, because the reason that the communities in the Europe are much different to their homelands. So he asks that the fault also lies with Muslims, because the reason that it's hard for them to actually assimilate and adjust themselves in Europe, in those communities in Europe. So I would like either to Mr. Masood Shatra or Mubin Jafar to answer this question, please. Either can answer this question.
Sorry, if I may say a word or two regarding this. Look, there is this perception that Muslims, and indeed I think this perception is also being amplified by the Islamophobes, like Henry Jackson Society and so forth that my colleague sort of highlighted. Look, Muslims are extremely integrated. Even Muslims in the Muslim land, be it Middle East or Pakistan or Iran, or they are actually very westernized. If anything, we're all, look at us, we're all wearing suits and ties and so forth. We have integrated. Each one. The research here shows that sort of Muslims living in the West, every single one of them has got friends among non-Muslims, colleagues among non-Muslims, and some of them are married, and so forth and so on. But when you look at the non-Muslims, you actually see that only a small proportion of them, overwhelming majority of them, around 80% of them, don't have no contact with Muslims in their own country. In Britain, which you could find Muslims in contact deliberately. They don't even want a Muslim to live next to really tackle the Islamophobia as what it is. Look, politicians, in our research, which we have done a number of research. These are some of the latest ones. These are qualitative research. And we've done it for Britain, for Canada, from United States, France, Germany. Another German report is coming in 2 weeks' time. And systematically, all of these Muslims identify and they say that Islamophobia is being promoted by politicians and the media on a daily basis. You know, why? Because there are more Islamophobes than there are Muslims. And, you know, the same way that there was a time that there were more racists than you know, people from the black and ethnic minority. Politically, is actually very sort of rewarding for them to be Islamophobic. They get more votes and so forth. Let us not have any illusion. And you know, I have to say that, you know, the recommendations that the brother made, some of them are extremely good, but also, you know, the Islamophobes and the governments are using the same systems. Interfaith now is actually an element of normalization Zionism. Every single Jewish organization which is involved in interfaith is a Zionist one. Not every Jew is Zionist, but that's what it is. It's actually part of normalization. They only talk to the Muslims that are, their own, they're singing the songs that they like to hear. And even media is the same thing. You know, you could end up having a lot of Muslim faces and Muslim names, but they will be promoting exactly the Islamophobia that is being articulated. Unless we put pressure on politicians to stop being Islamophobic, unless we actually put pressure and processes to stop the media. We did a research for EU on tools for stopping Islamophobia. The material is available on our website. We did it for Britain, Germany, and France. And part of those tools was to sort of change the processes in media, because the processes on media are Islamophobic. They becoming more Islamophobic as time goes. I'm sorry, but I really think that, you know, I remember Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui once was asked this thing. He turned around on the live media on television, and he said, I am the most integrated person that you could find. He was chief editor of Guardian. He was, he actually was part of a whole system, but he was being abused as, extremist Muslim because he actually had an independent view on things.
Very much so for explaining it really well. Now would like to move to the next question. That is being asked from Miss Noshi Bashir Sahiba. She is working in the Punjab Education Department. She asked the question that how the education in the Islamic world can help counter Islamophobia in the West and of course in the global arena.
Sorry, who do you want to answer this?
I would like anyone to answer.
Would you mind repeating the question?
The question is that how can education in the Muslim world can help counter Islamophobia in the West and of course in the global arena?
Okay. Basically, it's a very good question, I must say. I think more than education it is about diplomatic efforts. There are two parts of this question, education and diplomatic. As I have already explained in my presentation, that there should be an outreach to global organizations, human rights institutions, and courts. Of course, they can better highlight grievances of Muslims in those parts of the world, because there's a massive misunderstanding in the Western world. They believe that Muslims, the culture of Muslims, stands at odds with European culture. It is not a reality. It is just a tip of the iceberg. The reality is that there are millions of Muslims living in Europe. They are positively contributing, like they contributed after the World War II. And I have lived in the United Kingdom for many years, and I have seen there are millions of Muslims in Europe who play their positive role. So I think there's a dire need to understand that they should acknowledge that efforts should be made to bring that to limelight that Islamophobia exists, because the European leadership, European governments, they are not acknowledging this fact. Someone says that there was an incident where a Muslim beheaded a professor in France, but then it is not a justification to victimize millions of Muslims there. Even those incidents were actually condemned by a majority of Muslims who live there and all across the world. What happened in New Zealand Christchurch, and then what happened in Oslo, what happened in Germany, and what happened in the United Kingdom. Dozens of Muslims were killed, gunned down, butchered, ruthlessly butchered. But nobody ever said that it was an attack against Islam. What they said, it was attacked by a right-wing extremist. He was racist, he was mentally retarded, he was drug addicted. So there's a dire need to understand. That these attacks against Muslims, they do exist in the West. Once we have that acknowledgement, I think things will go better.
May I just add one sentence to this? Sorry, Bismillah. Look, I think our education around the world, and indeed even Muslim education in Europe, one thing is lacking, and I think one thing that the Islamophobes are winning is sort of destroying the self-confidence of our community and our youth. This whole process is actually geared to do that, to say that you have to abandon your beliefs, your aspiration, your political views as a Muslim and so forth, and replace it with something else. I think what we need to do, and I see this unfortunately not just happening in Britain, but even in Middle East, even in places like Saudi Arabia. We had a case yesterday, which in Egypt, Sisi has ordered Quranic verses to be removed from the school, from education in the school books of the children. We actually need to re-strengthen our confidence in ourselves, in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the way that Islam is a solution not just for Muslims, but Islam is a solution for mankind. If we don't understand this, then we have failed to understand our Islamic principles, and we need to re-educate ourselves. And so when we go and promote and want to sort of preserve our rights and so forth, we do it not as a minority, but we do it as an ideology of a minority which serves the whole mankind. And I think that we are failing in that aspect. We need to educate ourselves on that level.
Thank you very much, sir. This is the last question to Mr. Masood Chedra, that what role can countries like Pakistan play in order to counter Islamophobia?
I basically think that there is a huge role to be played by countries like Pakistan. I don't think personally one country alone could do this huge task. And I think those who are willing to be part of a coalition needs to come together. I remember recently, in the last year and a half or so, there was an attempt to bring Turkey, Malaysia, Iran, Qatar, and few of the countries together, and Pakistan together, to actually create a sort of a pro-Islamic sort of thing, because OIC is dead. I remember about 10 years ago, I was in a meeting with Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. And when we were discussing, he was saying that we should reform OIC. And I said, look, you are at that time, they were head of the OIC. I said, you are the head of OIC right now, and you're asking us to reform it. OIC cannot be reformed. Let me be frank. Look, there's no point of wasting. But those countries who are willing needs to come together, and we need to defend Islam and Muslims in the same way that others are defending Judaism and the Jewish community. Let us be, it needs to be proactive. You cannot sort of use the Muslims as a tool. And this is what they're doing. In West, they're using us as a tool. Mr. Erdogan has spoken against this regarding vis-a-vis German. And we had similar articulation from Pakistan, but I don't think that could be done by one state. We need to have a coming these states together with the specific thing of a pan-Islamic unity and saying, we are not going to allow this open season of, anyone who wants to become famous or become popular, all they have to do is attack Islam. I mean, this is a reality. And, we in the West cannot do it alone. And so we need to, all of us come together and actually promote Islam, as I said, a solution for humanity. Islam is not a problem for humanity. And we need to change that completely.
Thank you very much. I believe that we have completed our today's discussion on the topic on the rising Islamophobia in Europe. Thank you very much to the speakers, honorable speakers, as well as participants who remain with us all this time. Have a good day. Thank you very much.